moved together within a certain very short distance to produce a coherent summation of amplitudes for a more intense effect. Also, it can be used strategically to beam that effect, as of course can be done with loudspeakers. But this is a universal principle of wave behavior or field behavior in nature, the so-called constructive interference that stems from the coherent summation of amplitudes, leading to this quadratic dependence or n-squared effect, where n is the number of participants in a coherence-creating assembly. This, and we'll show again a little bit more about the fundamental mechanisms, the physics behind this, but this is of immense practical significance. Because 30 years ago, when sociologists began to discover that when a city had perhaps 1 or 2% of its population practicing transcendental meditation, the research showed a marked reduction of crime rates in that city. It created great excitement. If we could teach 1% of an entire country, you'd see a real drop in crime for the whole nation. But in fact, now it seems to be easier than that. Because of this n-squared effect, the square root of 1% of a population turns out to be enough, empirically enough, to produce a marked, statistically significant, easily measurable reduction in crime, social violence, psychiatric crisis calls, domestic violence. All these symptoms of societal stress subside dramatically and immediately when that stress is diffused and when unity and positivity and coherence radiate through society. It becomes very practical and very cost-effective to have, employ, engage, train a coherence-creating group of peace-promoting, meditating experts that can really provide a profoundly unifying and calming influence for an entire society. Let's talk for a few more minutes about the principles that uphold this remarkable scientific discovery, a very practical way of preventing crime and even war, as we will see, and then we'll come back and end with a few comments about practical steps of implementation. Let us look again very briefly at the deep mechanics for the spreading of social coherence, for neutralizing enmity and preventing violent conflict. This chart again shows the structure of our physical universe from physical, gross, superficial, diversified, to more fundamental, subtler, more powerful levels of natural law, culminating in the unified field, purely abstract field of intelligence at the basis of matter, which is a very powerful field of intelligence, in fact, millions upon millions of times more fundamental and more powerful even than the nuclear force. When it comes to human interaction, looking at this chart, and the ways human beings can influence other human beings, and the way coherence can spread throughout a society, coherence can spread throughout a society at any level of physical existence. Gross physical, chemical, quantum mechanical, quantum field theoretic, and unified field theoretic. This chart attempts to summarize a topic which really could be a subject for a dedicated conference, and perhaps it will be. This chart summarizes the different levels of human interaction and the mechanisms for the spreading of social coherence through the group practice of the Transcendental Meditation Program and its advanced techniques, which again are used in all of these studies because this is a technology of consciousness that is the most widely practiced, extensively researched, and particularly researched for its ability to prevent crime and social violence. This chart shows that at a classical level, human beings inevitably influence one another through, for example, physical contact is one way of communicating an emotion. Verbal communication, of course, is another way of communicating an idea, communicating a feeling, communicating calm. A visual communication and olfactory communication is possible too, like a gesture at a traffic jam. That leads to a medium-range interaction. And of course today there's the telephone and the internet and media, which provide classical but long-range mechanisms of communication that inevitably link human beings together, so that inevitably we have an influence on each other, even at a distance. But what we're talking about here are deeper levels of human interaction that are based upon the fundamental field-theoretic nature of consciousness. And I'll just mention two of these now and then leave the subject. for further discussion. First is quantum mechanical. Quantum reality is vastly more profoundly interconnected than classical reality. Most of you on this call will be well aware of this, but I'll just mention that in quantum mechanics, once two objects or two individuals have interacted, from then on, those two objects remain correlated with each other. That means if something happens to one object, instantaneously that influence is felt on the other object, even if those objects are distantly separated, even space-like separated. That is an extraordinary result, an extraordinary prediction of quantum theory that has been verified innumerable times in the laboratory. It speaks about a far richer type of subtle interconnection of things than was ever suspected to be possible, even by Albert Einstein. So, for example, if two elementary particles are correlated, perhaps they both emerge from the decay fragments of another particle and are flying off at high velocities in opposite directions. If an observation is performed on one of those particles to determine its spin state, up or down, for example, instantaneously the correlated particle will undergo a simultaneous collapse to down or up if the total initial spin was 0, for example. That is a very rich communication of influence over a distance. There's an infinity of information that gets communicated in just that one act, because quantum mechanically there is an infinite range of possibilities between spin up and spin down, or any superposition of up and down, and that indefinite state becomes definite upon measurement, and that communicates instantly across vast distances. Now, Einstein would insist, probably correctly, that that long-range, rich, underground communication, the subtle communication at the quantum level, cannot by itself be used to communicate a signal, because that would violate his notion of relativistic causality. But it can be used to profoundly augment any classical link whatsoever. And this has been demonstrated in the laboratory many times now in the phenomenon of quantum teleportation. Quantum teleportation is the ability to destroy an object here, for example, a laser beam, which has a very, very definite number of photons in a very particular quantum state, to destroy it here, measure and destroy, and recreate it in an exact quantum identical state over here. That requires a huge communication of information. That communication of information in the laboratory, that so-called quantum teleportation of an object, or a particle, for example, that huge communication of information is accomplished largely through the unseen quantum link between those correlated objects. A classical communication is also required, but of a very minimal type. A single bit of information over a phone line is enough to unlock a vast quantum mechanical communication link. We could talk about that at length if there were more time, but it is a scientific fact, and an important one, that the correlation between people and objects is real. And one way to influence people with whom we're most closely correlated, our loved ones, members of our own social network, or our own society, or our own nation, or our own nationality, our own cultures, those individuals with whom we're in closest correlation are most profoundly affected when we ourselves are affected by anything. So when groups of individuals collectively practice this transcendental meditation and advanced techniques and experience this profound state of inner unity, and collectively experience this ground state of consciousness, this unbounded field of consciousness at the basis of mind and matter, that profound influence of calm automatically communicates itself to individuals throughout society, even faster than the speed of light. The influence is instantaneous, and that's supported by the scientific research that shows that the ability to create social coherence and to prevent social violence is virtually instantaneous. And there are other mechanisms at even deeper levels. I'll just list them here. There's not really time to go into them, but these are all valid, scientifically known mechanisms of interaction at a distance between objects and individuals. We just talked about the quantum mechanical mechanisms of quantum teleportation. At the quantum field theoretic level, there is the phenomenon of Bose condensation, which after the discovery of Cornell and Ketterle, which won the Nobel Prize recently, even macroscopic objects like rubidium atoms and presumably marbles and people, everything is fundamentally quantum mechanical, and under the right circumstances, everything can experience this phenomenon of Bose condensation, this spontaneous phenomenon of coherent collective functioning. In the domain of human consciousness, we know how to prescribe those conditions which will induce consciousness in several nearby individuals to function coherently, to all simultaneously occupy the same quantum state, to simultaneously experience the field of pure consciousness, the unified field, and that Bose condensation effect provides a natural enhancement of the meditative experience when practiced in groups, leading to an increased statistical tendency of individual members of the meditating group to experience pure consciousness together, and to radiate that pure consciousness forcefully into the environment, just as laser light is a macroscopic quantum coherent phenomena where the individual photons become immensely more powerful by being in synchrony, where the brightness of a laser actually grows according to the square of the number of participating photons. That same phenomenon is activated in this group practice of the transcendental meditation and advanced techniques to produce a very, very concentrated influence of unity, of harmony, of peace in society. And there are even deeper mechanisms unique to the unified quantum field theoretic level. Now let us just end with some very, very important and practical comments that follow from this long theoretical investigation. In the world of peace and conflict resolution, we have just stumbled upon, I shouldn't really say stumbled upon, because really Maharishi Mahesh Yogi himself, due to his profound grounding in the Vedic tradition of knowledge, experientially, and through the Vedic literature itself, Maharishi predicted 25 years ago, perhaps 30 years ago now, that such a societal influence of meditation would soon be felt. And shortly thereafter it was. And as I said, it became a whole industry in the social scientific community. 600 studies now have been published in the world's foremost scientific journals, peer-reviewed scientific journals like the Journal of Conflict Resolution, studies conducted at 200 independent universities and research institutes in 30 countries throughout the world, showing the individual and sociological impact of Maharishi's transcendental meditation on reducing crime and social violence, and of course improving individual health, individual intelligence, brain development, human behavior, and so forth. So this is the most extensively researched phenomenon in the history of social science. Let me repeat this. It's very important. The reduction of social violence, including stopping open warfare in war-torn areas, virtually overnight through assembling a trained group of peace-promoting experts practicing transcendental meditation and advanced techniques. This phenomenon of reducing social violence through group meditation is the most thoroughly researched and rigorously established of any phenomenon in the history of social science. There is, of course, a certain amount of experimental evidence that aspirin reduces headache pain, and we take that for granted. But there is vastly more scientific evidence, and vastly more robust, that group practice of transcendental meditation and its advanced techniques reduces social violence and stops open warfare. More evidence for that by far than aspirin reduces headache pain, or in fact any phenomenon in the area of social scientific research. So this is a scientific fact of immense practical significance, especially, I believe, for us as national presidents of the Global Union of Scientists for Peace, who are a little tired of talking about peace because for 50 years now, peace-loving members of the scientific community have argued to the Congress, to the parliaments, to the ministers of government, to heads of state, individually and as groups, we have argued for the cessation of war for the reduction and elimination of nuclear weapons due to the unthinkable consequences of these weapons of mass destruction, and we have not really